You've probably heard of the Israeli settlements, the settler movement, and the presence of these settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. But how much do you actually know about it? Let's explore the settler movement and their activities a bit further. Since I'll mostly be talking about the settlers and settlement movement in the West Bank, I think it's important to first understand the geography and history of the West Bank itself. Now, the West Bank is the largest Palestinian territory, and the second territory, of course, is Gaza, where a war is going on right now. Now, if you look at the map, the red area is what is the West Bank. And the reason it's called the West Bank is because it's west of River Jordan. Where the red boundary ends towards the west is the state of Israel. And the West Bank was occupied by Jordan in 1948 war, and it remained an occupied part of Jordan until 1967. After the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel captured the West Bank, and it has since then been under Israeli occupation. It has a total area of 2,183 square miles. These are roughly just the broad details about the West Bank, but the most important thing to keep in mind is that for any future two-state solution, the West Bank is supposed to be the main Palestinian territory. And it also includes East Jerusalem, which was also captured and annexed by the State of Israel. Now, we also need to understand how the West Bank is administered politically and militarily now in these days. So the reason I suggested that the West Bank is crucial to a future two-state solution, if you look at the map in front of you, this is the 1947 Partition Plan, which was proposed through UN Resolution 181. The yellow areas in the map were supposed to be the state of Palestine, and the blue or the greenish areas are the ones that were supposed to be the state of Israel. But as soon as the state of Israel was declared, of course, there was an Arab uprising and a war. And after that war, the 700,000 Palestinians who were evicted from the Israeli territory are the ones who, some of them went to Jordan, some of them went to neighboring Egypt, but most of them found themselves in camps in the West Bank and in Gaza. And this is the territory, if we go back to the 1947 plan for a long-lasting peace, this territory is crucial to the future Palestinian state. Now, if you look at the Gaza of today, the map in front of you is the post-Oslo II map. Now, the Oslo II Accords were signed in 1995, and in that accord, the West Bank was divided into three kinds of land. Now, the green on the lands that you see and the brown, the dark brown, the greens are the Palestinian cities. They are called Area A. And Area A is under the direct control of the Palestinian Authority. The brown areas are scattered Palestinian villages, and they are partially under the control of Palestinian Authority, but the Israeli armed forces also operate there. And the gray area, which is the majority of the West Bank, is under Israeli control, and it also contains the settlements. So if you look at the map on the left, those were area A, B, and C as divided in Oslo II. And the map towards the right is a 2024 map of current settlements. Here's a bigger map of that. This is from a 2024 UN report, and these are all the settlements that have been established in the West Bank since the recapture of the West Bank by Israel in 1967. And if you look at the density of it, the UN report clearly points out how many new settlements have been introduced. So since the inception of Netanyahu government, 9 more settlements in the West Bank have been regularized. And the ones, the orange squares that you see, those are the outposts. And then rest of it all are the Israeli settlements. So overall, as of 2022, there are 450,000 settlers living in 132 Israeli settlements in West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem, with an additional 220,000 Jewish settlers residing in 12 settlements in East Jerusalem. So if we go back to this map, you can already see how densely the settlements have been established in the West Bank. And area towards the east, the shaded area, this is all controlled by Israeli military, and these are their firing ranges. Some of them are called nature reserves. So when you go back to this map, which was drawn during the Oslo II Accords, you can already see that the Palestinians living in the West Bank do not have a contiguous territory, because that territory, the gray, runs through all the major villages. That territory is not under the Palestinian Authority control, and increasingly that's where the settlements are being built, and even beyond that. So what we get post-Oslo II is a fractured geographical identity of the Palestinian population within the West Bank. Now remember, the West Bank is supposed to be the main territory of the Palestinian state. Now, the decision in Oslo II wasn't that this was going to be the final plan. This was supposed to be a step towards the peace process. The Palestinian demands are pretty clear, that Israel withdraws to the 1967 border, which is called the Green Line, and that's the line towards the left side of this map, which now has actually a physical barrier that the Israelis constructed, and a link to Gaza as part of the future peace plan. But since 1995, the Israelis who were supposed to move on with the peace plan have shown no interest in any kind of a future two-state solution or peace plan. Actually, the plan of this government, the right-wing government right now, is to do nothing, and they've absolutely denied any aim or attempt at reaching towards a two-state solution. Now that we understand a little bit about the West Bank and what has happened to it since its occupation since 1967, let us look at the legality of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Personally, I believe that all these settlements are illegal under the international law, but let's look at the international law itself. So Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention states that any occupying power will not change the demographics of the occupied space as occupiers. It will not move individuals or not do individual transfer or mass transfers of the native inhabitants of the occupied territory, nor would it move its own people into the occupied territory. The Article 49 is pretty clear and makes it illegal for the State of Israel to develop and establish settlements in West Bank, which also, according to the International Court of Justice, was clearly declared an occupied territory. Furthermore, in 2016, the United States Security Council also passed Resolution 2334. Now bear in mind, this is a UN Security Council resolution and not the UN General Assembly resolution. This resolution was passed by the permanent members of the UN, in which the United States abstained. It concerned the Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. The resolution passed in a 14-0 vote by members of the United Nations Security Council. 4 members with United Nations Security Council's veto power, China, France, and they also in this Resolution 2334 declare the settlements, establishment of settlements in West Bank illegal. So what the Resolution 2334 clarifies without a doubt is that the occupation of Palestinian territories, especially West Bank, was not only illegal, but in flagrant disregard to international law. Now, sadly, like so many other things in this world, the resolution is non-binding. But we have 2 documents. One, a clear convention, Geneva Convention, that states clearly that changing the demographics of an occupied space and removing people from it or bringing in your own people into it is illegal. And 2, a UN Security Council resolution that finds clearly that Israeli occupation of West Bank is against international law. If we just keep these 2 things in mind, we can very clearly posit that any settlements built in the occupied territories in West Bank are illegal and are in a flagrant disregard of the international law. There should be no doubt in our mind about that. Now, of course, Israel doesn't agree with that. And they've always looked for little exceptions here and there. For example, in terms of occupation, while the occupying forces cannot even administer the controlled territory, the local authorities must do that, right? But they use a small exception in it where they can say they can use some land for military use. So the first major settlements that were established were first land taken over for military use and was eventually converted into the settlements. But overall, there should be no doubt in our minds that the construction and establishment of settlements in the West Bank is illegal according to the international law. So what's the process? How are the settlements established? Usually, first, an outpost is established by a group of settlers. These are usually either young people or people affiliated with the extreme right wing of Israeli political spectrum. So they establish an illegal outpost in Palestinian territory, but they are still protected by the Israeli armed forces. Then eventually those illegal settlements are regularized and made legal by the administrative unit that runs this area for the state of Israel. Now, there are also incentives. There are indirect incentives. It's cheaper to live in the settlements, cheaper to afford a house over there. But after a settlement is regularized, it gets subvention funding, it gets funding for its infrastructure, right? So the might of the state of Israel is behind the settlement movement, and now increasingly more because the right-wing government now, of course, depends upon the votes of the right-wing ministers and right-wing parliament members to sustain itself. Overall, even though it is illegal to change the demographic nature of an occupied territory, since 1967, Israel has enabled and legalized massive build-up of settlements in the West Bank, to a point that now, if you look at the map, there is no possibility of a contiguous Palestinian state if the settlements are not withdrawn as part of the peace process. Now, it's not just peaceful settlement of Palestinian territory. The settlers are also heavily armed, and there are always countless instances of violence. Actually, since October 2023, the number of violent acts by settlers has increased drastically. So if you look at the map on the screen, this is from a United Nations report. In the first 9 months of 2023, there have been 835 incidents, the highest on record. Between 7 and 31 October, there were 203 settler attacks against Palestinians, which increased the daily average to 8. Almost half of all incidents between 7 and 31 October involved Israeli forces escorting or actively supporting Israeli settlers while carrying out attacks. Now, the Palestinian herding communities in the West Bank remain particularly vulnerable to forced displacement. A total of 1105 people from 28 herding communities, about 12% of the herding community, were displaced from their residences between January 22 and the beginning of September 2023. If you look at the map, every single red dot on the map is a recorded event of settler violence against Palestinian people. If you look at the graph below on the figures, you can see that the number of instances of violence, settler violence against Palestinians in October of 2023 increased drastically. So not only are these settlements illegal and built on Palestinian land, the land that will form part of the future Palestinian state, these settlers are also heavily armed, and they constantly are aggressive, not just towards settled villages of Palestinians, but also towards the nomadic community. We already know that the settlers usually always try to stop Palestinian farmers from harvesting their olive crop. You can watch my video about the Harvest Coalition, where Jewish activists come together to help Palestinians access their orchards and actually to save their crops from destruction by the settlers. So overall then, what we have learned so far is that the West Bank, only one part of it is under direct Palestinian Authority control, and even that, the Palestinian Authority has no control over its foreign policy or even on its electricity and water. That's controlled by Israel. Then Area C, which eventually by 1997 was supposed to be ceded to the Palestinian Authority under the peace process, is under direct control of Israeli armed forces and has seen the heaviest settlement activity. And then Area B are the villages which are also under direct control of Palestinian Authority, but the Israeli armed forces have legal rights to arrest and prosecute people from there. Another dynamic is that now, post-October 2023, the Israeli armed forces actively protect the settlers from Palestinians. So they are actually enabling the settler violence. Part of the reason is also legal. The Israeli armed forces in the West Bank have the legal authority to arrest Palestinians, to prosecute them in military courts, to fire at them, right? But they do not have the authority to even touch a settler. So in order to stop a settler from doing anything, they have to call the civil authorities, because the settlers are under the civil law of State of Israel. The Palestinians are under the military law of the military occupying force. And that is why people like us call it an apartheid occupation. So this clearly then tells us that there is not just the emotional burden of being occupied. Palestinians are seeing right in front of their eyes that their lands are being appropriated. Now, what else happens when a settlement is established? When a settlement is established and it is recognized, right, it is separated from the Palestinian territory. It usually will have a security fence, it will have its own security, and then it will be protected by the military. Sometimes, because of the fencing, what ends up happening is that the Palestinian village next door either loses access to their land because of its proximity to the settlement, or they have to go 5 miles and then cross through a security gate to get to the land that is right in front of their village. So it makes the Palestinian life even harder because of the settler presence over there. Now, these are the facts of life for Palestinians living in the West Bank. This is how they are living their lives. They are controlled by the Israeli armed forces. They are subject to the Israeli military law. And they are under a direct invasion by the settlers who continue taking over their land and building their settlements. This is, roughly speaking, the broader understanding of the settler movement that I have. So I've been talking about generally the impact of settlements and of settler violence. Let's just look at one example. The images that you see on your screen, they come from Associated Press, from an article, and I'll post the links in the description. This was village of Duma that was attacked by settlers in mid-April 2024. Now, here is what the journalist Jack Jeffries writes about it, and I quote, "The trail of wreckage along Duma's main road is the aftermath of a 3-hour attack in mid-April that left 15 homes damaged by arson and 6 residents injured by bullets," the head of its village council said. It was one of nearly 800 settler attacks against the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank since Hamas attacked Israel from the Gaza Strip on October 7, according to the United Nations. End of quote. Now, this article also clearly states that the villagers absolutely feel helpless because they don't have an armed force to defend them, and the Israeli armed forces will not defend them, did not defend them. Now, this is just one example of how the settlers can do this kind of damage to Palestinian life with impunity. And I've already shared with you that there have been more than 800 instances of settler violence just in 2023 and 2024. And since the Hamas attack, the instances have increased. Now, let us look at the long-term implications of settlements and the settler movement. We've already talked about how it impacts Palestinian life in a very cursory manner, but at least we get an idea. So the long-term consequences of it is, it clearly shows, to me at least as a scholar, that the current Israeli government has no plans for a long-term peace process. They are intent on instead taking over most of the West Bank. And if you listen to the right-wing ministers, the security minister, right, Ben-Gvir, he wants to resettle Gaza and establish settlements there. So unfortunately, the right wing of Israeli politics and their population has no intention of even working towards peace. They basically are working towards a sort of a total silencing and elimination of the Palestinian people. This is something that has been stated by them and that the world knows, that the United States knows, and their power brokers. In my humble opinion, if Israel wants peace, genuinely, there are three basic options, and these are not my thoughts. The first option is to work with the Palestinians and have a single state solution in which the Palestinian Arabs and the Jews live as equal citizens. I think that would neither be acceptable to Palestinians nor the Israeli public. The second option is to go back to the 1947 plan, pick up where Oslo II left, and work towards creating a contiguous, viable Palestinian state with the assurances of the world, right? But a viable Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza. That, to me, will be the most practical solution to the problem of peace. There will have to be negotiations, there will have to be give and take, of course, but if the United States commits itself to it, and if Israel commits itself to it, and the Palestinians, that is probably the most achievable process. The third option for Israel is what they are already practicing, and that is slow elimination of the Palestinian people, demonizing of the Palestinian people, silencing of the Palestinian people. That is what, in my opinion, the extreme right-wing Israeli government is doing, and they think that they can get away with it. I sure hope they don't. But overall, the settlement movement is not an unmotivated movement. It is politically driven. It is a movement of dispossession, and it violently replaces Palestinian population, takes over Palestinian lands, and the Israeli armed forces are enablers of that process, and so is the Israeli government. You've already seen how much violence is there and how the Palestinians are treated. Now, the question that a lot of people here, politicians and people on the street, keep asking, because they keep wondering why Palestinians are so angry, why their youth throw rocks at the soldiers. I mean, think of it in your own terms. If someone came and took over your territory and told you you were inferior, and that you will be governed by an armed force for 75 years and will have no rights. If you are a people with a little bit of life in you, what will you do? So the strategy shouldn't be to dehumanize Palestinians and demonize them. Yeah, of course, their leadership makes mistakes. The people make mistakes. The strategy should be to treat them as fully realized, equal human beings with the rights that every human being ought to have and does have, and then approach towards peace. And if Israel really wants peace and a two-state solution, stopping the settlements and withdrawing to the 1967 border should be the first step that they ought to take. Because any encroachment into Palestinian territory, any destruction of the Palestinian property, obviously is not likely to work towards peace. So overall, in this video, we started with a general understanding of the West Bank itself. We went over its history. We went over the 1947 UN plan, which still probably is the most important document towards future peace. And then we looked at how the West Bank is governed post-Oslo II, which was supposed to be a process to peace, but it stopped there. And then we looked at how the West Bank has been now reduced to, for Palestinians, a territory which is totally distributed and wedged through by the Israeli armed forces and the settlement activity. That now that you look at the map, you can't even imagine a contiguous Palestinian territory. And that is the most important thing that you should keep in mind, because every time someone tells you of Palestinian Authority not doing enough for their people or not living up to their obligations, look at the map. Where is their authority? What legal authority do they have over the West Bank? It's this tiny, I think it's 21% of the West Bank, and not with much resources. So these are some of the things to keep in mind. I hope this has been useful to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Any suggestions for peace are welcome. I'm deeply grateful for your time, and if you have more time, please do take a look at the Palestine playlist that would come up. And as always, I'm grateful for your support. Thank you so much. And as always, peace and love.